Five past seven. We had welcome everybody. We welcome to the AACE Bruce County Local Technical Event for November 2023. We haven't had many this year, but we're going to get back into stride as we go forward. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joined us tonight. We did have 41 registrants, but as I've known before, when we have these virtual events, a lot of people register and then expect a beautiful video that follows. So that's my job after this. So I'd like to welcome Scott, the magnificent Mr. Morrison, for coming tonight and giving us a presentation, which I'm sure will be very entertaining. What I'd like to start off with, I have a short video about AACE's mentorship network, which I'd like to share with you. It's only 4 minutes, and then we'll get into Scott's presentation. So give me a minute whilst I share my screen. Hopefully you can see the screen. Can you see it? Okay.
Every achievement starts with a vision, a desire to push past limits and achieve greatness. This is a journey of growth, of realizing your true capabilities. Are you ready to embark on that journey? Invest in yourself and unlock your full potential.
AACE is committed to advancing cost engineering and project controls. The key to success is investing in our most important asset, our people. That's why we're excited to introduce the AACE Mentor Network.
Expand your understanding, discover new perspectives, and make purposeful connections to accelerate thought leadership.
By offering guidance and support to aspiring professionals, the AACE Mentoring Program enables individuals at all stages of their careers to enhance their skills, broaden their knowledge, and prepare for the challenges of the future. Mentoring plays a critical role in the path to success in the cost engineering and project controls industry.
Push beyond limits and pursue your vision of success. Our mentors are highly experienced professionals dedicated to helping you develop your skills, whether it be through technical skills guidance, certification preparation, career advice, or writing your first technical paper.
The First Time Authors program was developed to help anyone writing their first technical paper. As AACE membership transitions from baby boomers to Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and beyond, it's going to become increasingly important to engage with our rising professionals. Mentorship is a critical step in that process.
When I took the advantage of this mentorship program, my mentor, Greg Whiteside, he gave me first a piece of confidence by sharing his experiences and gave several tips in formulating the paper and making it to the final submission. Here I am now. I'm the first-time author.
Be the spark that ignites positive change. Create a more inclusive future in the industry.
As a woman in project controls, it is critical to have mentors and role models who share our perspectives. The AACE Mentor Network provides a platform for us to come together and create a supportive community and learn from each other's experiences to grow both personally and professionally. Together, we can create a stronger and more diverse industry where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
Lead with purpose, inspire with action, and make a lasting impact. Volunteer to be a mentor. Mentoring is a rewarding experience that offers personal and professional growth opportunities. It's a powerful way to invest in your career.
Being a mentor is one of the most rewarding ways of giving back. Not only you're contributing to the development journey of others, you're also shaping the future of our profession.
I recently had a mentor or have one, and they have been in the field for quite a few years, and I'm new to the industry, and they've been able to help me really understand different ways to progress, what kind of certifications, and really kind of talk to me about what do I really like about it. So then they can help me clarify those goals and where I really want to end up.
Take your career to the next level. Your potential is limitless, and the future is yours to create. Join us today and see the difference mentoring can make in your career. The AACE Mentor Network, building a better future together.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully that helped a few people. And I tell you, mentoring is one of the most important things I've ever done. Watching other people grow based on the feedback and information that you provide to them and guide them through the crocodile field of career is always a good thing. And please, if you have any questions regarding the mentorship program, please reach out and we can provide input to that. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the marvelous Mr. Morrison to take us through his presentation tonight, and I'm sure it'll be enlightening. A little bit of humor, I'm sure, Scott. And the way we're going to run this is Scott's going to run through his presentation. We will, if you have a question as you go through, I would advise you to please use the meeting chat, which I have opened up. Add your question into there, and we'll capture all those and go through them at the end when Scott gets to the end of his presentation. I will facilitate that process for everybody. I will ask those questions to Scott and repeat them back to avoid you having to do that. And if there's any clarifying questions, we'll do that too. So Scott, please, over to you.
Okay, all right. Just a sound check. You can hear me okay, Rob?
I hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. All right, let me know when you can see my screen there.
We can see your screen. Go ahead.
Very good. Okay. So first of all, just wanted to say thank you to the board and to everyone who joined tonight. I've been looking forward to sharing this story. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the importance of project controls to support construction claims. And this is a real life experience that I had on a project that I worked on 20 years ago. So it was back in 2013. So it's near and dear. It was a really great learning experience, and it kind of feeds into the mentorship piece. So some of the relationships I built on working with this project and some of the lessons learned that I had. So I'm pretty excited to share this. So I think I'm looking down the participants list here, and I think I know most on the folks, but for those who don't know me, my name is Scott Morrison, as Rob introduced myself. I've been working for Bruce Power here for the past 12 years, since 2011. But before that, where I was gaining this experience from the story I'm going to tell tonight, I was working for a construction company and spent about 10 years in the construction industry prior to that. So I know a lot might not believe it, but I do have a bit of a construction background. So that's where this story comes from. Let's see if I can get my screen to move here. All right, so some of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight is I'm going to give you an overview about this particular project that I'm going to share about, which is the Mayo Dawson City Transmission Line project. It was a project that we worked on in the Yukon Territory 20 years ago, and it was an extremely complex project with a significant amount of issues. Talk a little bit about what those key complexities were and what made it such a challenging project. And as you can tell from the discussion points, was ended up in a claim situation, and project controls played a very key piece to what we needed to do to resolve those claims. Talk about a project that didn't go very well and how we had to quote unquote rebuild a project in order to quantify a claim and what that process was like. Talk a little bit about, for those who haven't been in a claims process, but this was this was a pretty significant claims process that had a pretty large impact, and it was a pretty public project in back in those days. And then just share some of the valuable lessons learned, and then I'll get to the punchline at the end of the presentation. Talk a little bit about some of the results, what happened there, and what we took away from that, and what we can help do to prevent these sorts of things from happening in the future. So the Mayo Dawson City transmission line project was a transmission line project. It was a design, procure, construct, and I was working for the constructor, the design build contractor at the time. 223 kilometer transmission line, and the scope of the project was to supply surplus baseload to the town of Dawson City, Yukon. And when the next slide talks a little bit about the transmission line and the route, but really what the benefit to the project was that this was actually a project that was probably a little bit before their time, in that the city of Dawson was actually fed by a series of diesel generators. So not a very clean way to produce power for your community. And although a very small community of between 1,000 1,500 people, it was feasible to build this line to take the load from the town of Mayo, Yukon. And they had a base load there, a base surplus there, because there was a mine there that closed. So then they ended up with this base load with nothing to do. So they thought they would ship it off to Dawson City. So it's a 66 kV line, and it stretches that 223K. And there's a couple substations along the route that were in scope as well to feed a little town called Stewart Crossing. If I go to the next slide here, you can see a little bit about the logistics of the project. So if you see the map of Canada here, you can see we're down here, just 3 hours west of Toronto here, and here's Dawson way up here, almost on the border of Alaska. And this was a complex project for a couple different reasons, but obviously logistics was a big part of it. And if you take a look, you can see that between the city is the town of Mayo and Dawson City, there's not a whole lot in between. So the transmission line primarily ran the corridor of the highway, and I could tell you a lot of stories about that. But it was all about having been able to solve the problem up here in the town of Keno City. That's actually where the former mine site was closed. So just to give you an idea of some of the logistics. And my role on the project, I was just out of school, took civil engineering as a background, and got tossed into the fire. So I was a QA inspector on finishing up some of the deficiency work on the transmission line, and then supported a lot of the procurement of the some of the commissioning activities on site of the substation. So I came in about 1.5 years after the project started, and I was telling a couple colleagues at work about this. Was basically got shipped on a plane as a young engineer and said, you can come home when the project's over. So that was my introduction into the project's world. A little bit of humor for you, Rob, there. So talking a little bit about the key complexities that made this a really challenging project was that we were in a remote work location, so it was a procurement nightmare. We struggled with getting materials there, and much like what we see for those who work on the Bruce site, it's not easy to find materials locally, let alone when you're working that remotely. The project had a very poorly written scope of work, and we ran into a significant amount of unknowns and discovery work, and we'll get into that a little bit. Another observation that we had a pretty inexperienced project team. I was a pretty green person. The project manager on the construction side had worked on many projects, but maybe not something this quite complex and challenging. And also on the owner side, the owner of the project was Yukon Energy, and this was the biggest capital project that they had ever managed, and they had only ever started really getting into the capital project world in about 5 years prior to this, in 1998. So they didn't have a whole lot of experience delivering projects, and they were also fairly green. So we can talk about that and some of the lessons learned, but it was a real added a lot of complexity to this project. The key thing for us as AACE members, we really did not have the right controls in place to manage this project, and we'll talk about that. But in terms of what we would consider a baseline schedule, a control budget, and establishing and knowing about the risks of the project, those things were not done very well in this project, and it led to a lot of issues, and it didn't help when we got into a position where, with an unclear scope and a lot of unknowns, we ended up in a position where we really needed strong project controls processes to help keep this project inside of the box. And the other part of it too was the other thing I just of note was that we had a really poor contract. It wasn't a great contract, and looking back at it now and understanding some of the things that were in there, it was pretty vague in a lot of places. And when you get into a legal battle with somebody, vagueness is never a good thing. So just to give folks on the call here an idea, when we talk about the contract was made up of a unit price contract for the transmission line portion of the work, where we essentially got paid for each transmission line pole that we put in, depending on the condition that it was in. And then we had a fixed price scope of work that we delivered for the substation work. So, and one thing that should be noted is that for the unit type portion of the work, it was I'll call it shaped that way because of the biggest technical challenge that we had here was understanding the geotechnical conditions and the ground conditions that we were building the transmission line for. So because of some of those unknowns, the contractor, myself working on the contractor side, we weren't willing to take that on as a fixed price, take the risk on that. So we were at least able to bring that in as part of a unit price contract, but there was still some complexities with that. So just some of the high level complexities with this particular project. So what went wrong here? So I broke this down and talk about three key things that went wrong. Was we had a very poor scope of work for the foundation work for the transmission line, and this stemmed from a very poor geotechnical report. So the soil conditions that we encountered during construction were significantly different or anticipated than what was included in our estimate and what was included in our, I'll call it our fixed price contract. So for those of us who have worked in the north, and when you get that far north, you encounter something called permafrost. And permafrost is essentially that the ground doesn't thaw throughout the year. So, and when you do I'll say dig into permafrost, it essentially just melts underneath you. So by disturbing that permafrost, you essentially turn something that is frozen tundra into something that's very soft like jelly. So long story short, we encountered a significant amount of the root that was in heavier permafrost locations that were expected, which mean that we had to use a different type of foundation to plant the hydro pole. So in simple terms, we went from being able to auger hydro poles into the ground to having to dig holes with excavators, put in a culvert, backfill it with gravel, and put additional guy wires on a line. So it became significantly more expensive than just augering a hole and planting a pole. So that was the key piece that if we would have had some better project controls practices in place, we could have tracked some of that work a lot better. So that was a key piece. We also had a transmission line route that wasn't necessarily clearly defined. So we had again in that geotechnical report, the proposed route that we were going to take this line down, and we had to make some significant changes to the route, which changed not only the length of the route, making it a little bit longer, it increased the number of structures that we had, and it also created some complexities with design, because we had to change some of the standard designs based on some of the terrain that we had to go through. So the changing of the route significantly changed the scope of what the project was, and then just that poor scope had a big impact on the unit price of the project. And it wasn't all on just those things too. We had some design deficiencies too on the contractor side. So we had a couple of transmission pole structures that had to be adjusted, and we had some deficiency work to do and rework as a result of some poor designing. And we also had a significant amount of issues in commissioning this. So the turnover of getting this thing commissioned, and there was a lot of complexities in that the current substation at the Dawson City end of the line had essentially a big switch there in order to leverage the diesel generator as a backup in case there was ever a line outage. So there was complexities in how that system worked, and it wasn't necessarily the smoothest process working through that design. And then the mismanagement piece, and this is all about that inexperienced team. There wasn't the controls in place that we needed to make sure that we managed this contract. And there was a lot of lessons learned from that in a lot of the work that I do today, I still think back to this, even though this was 20 years ago. And going back to that poor contract language, it was very vague, and we're talking about a $23 to $24 million project that turned into a roughly $40 million project. And we didn't have that mechanisms inside of that contract to make it easy to manage. So those three key things went wrong that really spun this project off the rails. So I touched on this a little bit, but the project ended up being well over a year late from being delivered. So that was a significant political pressure in terms of, this was the first big project that Yukon Energy had ever produced, and it wasn't going well. It was a contractor that was looking to build its reputation in this industry, and the first big project that they didn't go well. The budget was significantly over, so 30 to 40% off. By the time we got to the end of the project, there were so many differences between the owner and the contractor that us on the contractor side, we actually walked off the project. We took a 2-month break in there, and actually had to go in and work through a litigation process to actually get us back to work. End of the day, the owner sued us on the contractor side, and the contractor sued the owner. So it was going to be an ugly situation regardless of when we actually finished this project. And we'll get into that on a little bit here in a couple of slides. But the other thing that it did too, and it's hard to really quantify it, but when you work for a small company, you only have limited resources, and a significant amount of our resources were tied up in this project. So we couldn't go in and work on other projects or bring in other revenue for the company. So there's a pretty significant cost impact to that as well. And again, that political nightmare in terms of, being in the newspaper, and it was really a reputation hit to everyone involved. And it was just not something that was, as much as it was a really fun, interesting, wonderful place to work. People in a town of 1,500 said, "Hey, you're the guy that worked on the project that's all screwed up out here. What are you doing about it?" Right? And as a young engineer and working on a project like that, it was something that you had to learn to deal with at a very young age. So just some of the things that happened here on the project. So I talked a lot about how project controls could have been leveraged to help us work our way through this and really prepare ourselves to get into these contract disputes, and probably could have helped the state out of some of these contract disputes. So it's really, really important to understand some of these things. And some of the key things here, when we talk about this all the time about planning, and it started at the estimating phases, and we needed to make sure that we did better detailed planning and really understood the project better before we even got to work on the project. So, quote unquote, we didn't spend enough time in the Yukon understanding really where we were working, mapping out where the route was going to go. We assumed it was going to follow the corridor of the highway. And as you can see from the picture I was able to dig up here, you can see some of the type of terrain that we were working on in terms of rerouting this line to make sure that we got it in the right spot. So there was all kinds of complexities there, and a little bit more effort up front planning probably could have saved us a lot of time. As crazy as it sounds, we didn't have a baseline schedule. So the project didn't have something to compare themselves to versus what happened out in the field. And once we got so far down the road, it became a very reactionary process where we weren't planning what we were going to do the next day. We were just dealing with issues, and it became a real challenge. And we didn't really have a frame of reference of where we should have started versus where we should have ended, which became an issue when you get into a claim situation. And again, we spent a significant amount of money on procurement items, and it was a nightmare. And better planning would have saved us to understand exactly what key pieces of equipment we needed, where we needed to logistically put it, and we could have saved a lot of money. 2003. I wish it was only 10 years ago. We talk about the money portion of the project, and a key thing that we deal with is control budgets and the change process. And again, there was a budget that we had for this project, but it didn't tie to our schedule, and it didn't tie to our estimates. So we really weren't managing it the right way. It was, we looked at it and we said, we talk about having deliverables and control accounts that we charge costs against. We didn't have that granular breakdown. So from a high level point of view, it looked as if we had, we have lots of money left in the budget, but we were overspending in so many areas that we couldn't see that because we didn't have the right breakdown around the budget of the project. And the key piece that we took away from this was really about the change management process. We didn't have a good change management process, both internally or externally with the client. So we actually were documenting changes in an email process, and that's not where you want to be. It was sort of like, hey, we ran into this change today. Here's an email to let you know about it, and that was a recipe for disaster when we got to the end of the project. And then another thing I noted here was just that communication piece. And those of us who have worked here at Bruce Power and other companies know that documentation, retention records of all of those sorts of things, that was very poorly done as well. So some of those processes would have saved us a lot of time when we got to the claims process, and it was I'll just say a nightmare to work through that. And the last piece I just wanted to touch on is really about the risk process. And this is something that I don't think out in industry we give enough respect to really understanding about the risk process. But we didn't do a good enough job on this project in managing risks. We didn't maintain a risk register. I'm sure there was all kinds of discussion about risk, but we didn't write it down. We didn't think about it. We didn't plan for it, and we were very reactionary when we were mitigating risks. And like I said, when we get into that get it done mode, because the project was reeling and spiraling, everything snowballing, costs just added up and added up and added up. So a key piece there is making sure that you identify and plan for risks, and make sure that you do the right mitigations. So when we got to the end of the project, it was late 2003. They finally let me go home, and we then spent a year and a half actually working through rebuilding a project. Because we did not have a leg to stand on in a claims process, we needed to go back and rebuild this project. So we did a number of things here. So we actually went and built what our schedule would have been. So we actually took our estimate, took the information that we used from the tendering process and the proposal process, and we built in P6. And back in those days, it was Primavera, a baseline schedule, or what I call here a should have had schedule. And then based off that, we built a number of what if scenarios. And those schedules, they were P3. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to answer questions, but I see them coming through here. But we built those what if schedules because that really gave us our durations to say how long we could have done that, how long we should have taken us to do this project versus what it actually took. And we know that yeah, Jules has got it. We know that it was a really a long process, and we had to do those things that we see in terms of interactive planning sessions, get a lot of the people that were involved in the proposal process to really establish all of those schedules. then we use those schedules to quantify our costs. So comparing back to our original estimate using those what if scenarios, and then we were able to quantify things like overhead costs based on those what if schedules. And then we had a number of individual claims that we built where we were actually building estimates for what it actually took to do those things. So we had increased costs to those different changing conditions on the transmission line, on routing, on foundation types, and then all of the challenges that we had in poor specifications that we had to actually do the design on for the substation work. So from between the years of 2004 and mid 2005, I worked in a construction trailer on building out this claim with the project team and really rebuilding this project. So we spent hundreds of hours pulling this together, and we even went down to the level of detail of taking everybody's Outlook files, organizing emails to make sure that we pulled all of the documentation to do this. And we ended up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 different individual claims on this project. And there's a company out there called Rive and Associates, and they're a claims expert in the industry, and they helped us actually manage through and build our claims. So we rebuilt this entire project, and one of the key lessons learned that I'll talk about here later is if we would have just used some of the industry best practices and processes up front, we could have really saved this time to actually build our claim. And then we get into supporting a claims process. So really, this is the key message here was that all this work was necessary. We needed to make sure that we could justify these claims to recoup the money for the business, and it was a tough slug to make sure that we worked our way through that. And we needed to make sure here in the second bullet that we had the right level of detail required, and to make sure that this would pass the sniff test in a court of law, because this project was destined to get in front of a court. So we needed to make sure that we did that, and we were able to pull all these claims together, and we could put our hands on our hearts to really get up in front of a court of law and tell our story. And the cost was pretty astronomical. We spent I don't remember the numbers, but it was definitely north of $1 million just in claims preparation and rebuilding the project. But without that investment, there would have been no opportunity for a return, because we did such a poor job during the execution of the project to track all these sorts of things. And then we get into a lot of the lessons learned, and we talked about these as we went through the presentation here tonight. But really, the key thing here for us is, understanding in scope. Ensure your proposal or your estimate, you document your assumptions. If you don't know, it becomes a risk or it becomes an exclusion. And when we think about planning for projects, and we go in through in Bruce Power Space as an example, we work through CD gates and we elaborate that scope. It's so vitally important to use our estimating process and our planning process to make sure that we have the right scrutiny and really understand our scope, so that we can lock in those costs and really understand what we're going to deliver to our clients. The second key piece here is, whether you're an owner or a contractor, you want to make sure that you have the right contractual project controls requirements and processes in place to control your project, because things are always going to change. And that missing change process where we didn't get, I'll call it, approval or verification that things were changing as the project grew along, an owner might put their arms up and say, hey, this isn't a change. You didn't acknowledge this as this was something that was outside of your scope. So that process is key, and it doesn't matter if you're a multi-billion-dollar contractor or you're a home renovation company. Is make sure that you have that change process in place, whatever it happens to be. And the third bullet here is one that we talk a lot about, and it's plan, and then plan the plan. So if you don't have a proper schedule, you're not going to get anywhere, because you don't really know what you want to deliver. So you have to make sure that you have that, and that's a key thing on any project. We need to understand what you're doing and when we're going to do it at all times. And that was a significant gap, and a real lesson learned for me is the value of a good schedule. Make sure that you have the processes to document the changes regardless of how big or small. So this is a bit of a repeat of the second one, but we need to make sure that you document it and retain that information that goes along with it. And digging through hundreds of emails looking for information to substantiate why we moved a transmission line, 50 meters off the approved right of way. That was that was the sort of things that we were working through to try to understand. And in a lot of cases, we had to be honest with ourselves. So you want to make sure that you are quote unquote keeping track of those things in live time and data. And then the fifth key lesson learned that we got here was the right person for the right job. So projects are extremely complex, and this was in the grand scheme of things, it didn't seem like a complex project, but it was an extremely complex project. And I find myself very lucky to have worked on something like this so early in my career because of all the different lessons learned that I took out of it. So it was definitely key. But when you go back and you think about the I'll call it how the project controls process supports the claims process, the two key lessons here is without a project controls process in place, we had no business making a claim. Without the work that we did to really recreate that project, we never would have had a leg to stand on it in a court of law. So it was a really significant challenge. And then it always ends up with how did the story end? So the question mark, I say it was a happy ending for both and a question mark. So after we sort of built the claims and started into those early litigation processes that were laid out inside of our contract, we were actually able to work with the owner after a new management team was hired at Yukon Energy. We're actually able to settle the project outside of a court of law, which ultimately saved everybody a ton of money on legal fees, a ton of money on time, and it got the project out of the limelight. And if you were to go out and you were to Google this project, you'd actually see an auditor's general report written about it for the Yukon territory that talks about a lot of the things that I talked about here. So ourselves on the contractor side, we were able to recoup our losses, and we did make a little bit of a profit on the project, but it wasn't without a lot of heartache and a lot of hard work by a lot of different people to be able to quote unquote recoup that money for the business. From a reputation side, it took a long time to rebuild our reputation. It was, this company, they had this big project, they weren't able to deliver it, and that was the first and only transmission line we ever built. We did other stuff in the hydroelectric and substation work and the power industry, but we never did actually build a transmission line again, which was a shame that we couldn't use the experience that we gained on that project on future projects. And the last thing here is the owner was delivered a project. So Yukon Energy, regardless of having to pay more than what they expected to pay, and it was significantly over budget, they still got what they needed. They got that transmission line, and the cost benefit still made sense to do that. So even though it paid more, it still paid the taxpayers and the government of Yukon money, still put money in their pockets by getting off of diesel generation. So the cost benefit analysis still made sense even at the cost that the project was delivered at. And it didn't feel like a successful project, but we were able to deliver something that was successful. So really, that's sort of the story. So I was just going to see if we had any questions in the chat, Rob. Hopefully I didn't go through that too fast, but it was a fascinating experience, and I'm glad I got to do that early on in my career.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I appreciate the sharing. So there is some questions, so I'm just going to go through them from the top. You answered
Sure.
a couple on the way, so that's okay.
I couldn't keep my eyes off of the little box.
You couldn't resist. So Izaz asked a question here. Was there any challenges with land zoning?
Not really, because the most of this was on Crown land. So there was some early stage engagement with landowners to go across some of their land, and we actually had somebody that was dedicated to doing that throughout the project. But that was actually not as much of a challenge as it might be. So if you were working on the Milton to Bruce power line, a much more significant challenge, but we didn't really run into those many challenges. And I'm trying to remember, but I don't think there was more than over that. So over that 223 kilometers, I don't think we ran into more than 10 or 15 landowners across that entire route. So it wasn't a significant challenge. Good question.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, pretty remote, right?
Very remote.
Next question is from the Ryan Hindle. Was there any acknowledgement as this was going on of the gaps you noted? So through the process, was there any sort of hang on, this is not going well type question, I think?
Yes, there was. And I think that's why ultimately we walked off the project, because we were being pressured by the owner to keep going, meet the schedule, get things done. And when we walked off the project, we probably should have walked off the project sooner. There was that acknowledgement. And myself, I came under the project later in the project. So I can't say is that all of the history between it. I learned my history actually rebuilding it. There was that acknowledgement, but I think that was something on the contractor side that we needed to raise the red flag higher, because if we would have had better controls around some of this, I think we would have realized just how far off the rails we actually were. So that was, I think we knew, but I don't think we understood how big the impact was or how bad it really was.
Okay. So a follow-up question to Ryan's before we get on to the next one is
sure.
How would project controls have helped you with that?
Beautiful question. So I think if you would have thinking about, like, I think back to building that baseline schedule and saying, you know, we're going to build this in 18 months. And we would have known right away when we would have encountered these delays that we would have had blazing red SPI and CPI metrics, because we would have been overspending, and we wouldn't have been earning any value on the work that we were performing, and we would have been behind on our earned or our planned value. So I think that if we would have had that right reporting cycle where we were reporting these metrics and looking at these things on, it doesn't have to be a daily basis. It could have been a weekly or a bi-monthly basis, because it was a long duration project, that we could have caught a lot of things sooner and maybe rethought about how we executed this project. Maybe after the first, couple months, we hit the timeout button and said, we got to send the crew home for a couple months, do some more replanning, save us burning that money and taking another look at this. So I think that was a big part of it. And I think that some of that inexperience of the project team that's shown in a situation like that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. I don't disagree. Been there myself. Yeah. Looking at the questions, I'm just going back up to the top. A lot of questions about Microsoft Project, but that was just me being an So it was a bad experience, right? This is a question from me, Scott. So it was a nightmare experience. So why did you stay in project controls? Why did you stay in what you do now?
That's a good question. I think that I after this project, the question is, after I worked on this project, I actually was assigned to a project that was the best project that I ever worked on. And it was a construction of an earth-filled dam. And I've got a picture of it on the wall in my office. And it was a $104 million project that we delivered for $96 million, and we delivered it 8 months early. So I had the complete opposite experience on my very next project. And what I learned in that project was how good it can be. And really for me, it was that taking the lessons learned from the really poor project to seeing what's done when you do things right, and actually learning learning those lessons learned and actually implementing them. So one of the things that we did on the next project was if you are going to correspond with the contractor or the owner, then you're going to write a request for information, and you're going to get something written back to response to your question. And we created that, RFI log to track all of these things. So we did everything the right way so that we understood exactly where we were in time and space. And it really showed me the benefit of this and how good it can be. So it was, I stuck around because I could see how good this was too. And who wouldn't want to work on projects?
Don't ask that question. No, I agree. Don't worry. It's the scratches and bumps and the pain and the scars you have that keep you in what you do, right? And that's why we get better. So appreciate you sharing that personal insight there. So
100%.
A comment from Marfisa was that it's more about reputation is your most valuable asset for sure, right? So we often forget that it's what other people see that you're doing and how that is perceived outside of the project you're delivering sometimes can make or break that project. So a good comment there from Marfisa. So
yeah, and one of the things that happened in this particular case, I didn't say it as part of the presentation, but I'll share it with the group here, is that as part of that walking off the project and the litigation process that we went through, the company that I was working for, we lost our ability to bond. So we that really took away a lot of the work that we could go and chase to get done. So that reputational piece, it lasted like 10 years because it limited what work we could go and do, right? If you wanted to do work for a public utility without bonding, it didn't happen. So it was a real big hit, and it should never have happened, but it did. And it took a long time to get out of that hole. So you're absolutely right, Marfisa. The reputation piece is a huge part of it.
And Scott, I think sometimes we forget when we're working for a vendor like Boost Power that how vulnerable the world is in terms of contracting and bidding for work. Right? It's not easy, and you're only as good as your last job. I've always said that. You've probably heard me say that before. Your reputation is only as your last project, right? So it's a good. Right. Next question, a question from Scott Reese. During execution, were you able to work year round? Obviously, the location was challenging, but were you able to work year round?
Yes, and believe it or not, Scott, it was at the planned construction schedule was to build the line in the winter, and that was done on purpose because we were able to insulate the permafrost with the snow, so we could actually move equipment up and down the hydro line, and it was better for brushing and all of those sorts of activities. So it was, as crazy as it sounds, it was way more beneficial to actually build this line in the winter months. So yeah, we ended up working year round, but the key pieces of the work were actually done in the wintertime.
Interesting comment now, right? Anyway, carrying on, I just conscious of the time, but Julian Gilbert says, "Who's the bloke in the white helmet?" I think that was you.
That was. I had to.
You haven't aged a minute there, Scott. I need to know what your secret is. Daryl Zetler says, "Were there any productivity claims, and how did you justify them?"
Productivity claims. What do you mean, Daryl? You can come off mute.
But I'm off mute. Productivity claims, like did the owner think you guys weren't constructing fast enough, or how did they expect you to justify your claims in any change that you found in construction?
Right. I would say there was a productivity claim in terms of there was quote unquote liquidated damages if we didn't commission by a certain time frame, and there was a date in the contract, and unless you had an approved change, you couldn't change that date. So there was a counterclaim in the lawsuit from the owner back to us based on being late to deliver that. And part of building those different what if schedules was to say, listen, if we didn't encounter all of this mismanagement and all of these issues, we would have been 2 months early. So we used those what if schedules, but we also understood that there was issues on the contractor side too. So, we had to kind of build these very different scenarios to kind of pick some data points in between to say where would we actually land with a most likely schedule. And we did some pretty good 2003, 2004 AI analytics to kind of come up with what we thought that what should have been duration was. So we had to work backwards, but it was an interesting process for sure. So yeah, there was some productivity claims.
Okay, thanks, Scott and Daryl. A question from Daryl. Did the company you work for stay in business? And if so, for how long? And in my experiences, companies go under when projects go into litigation. So tell us the history of the company there, Scott.
So I think I'm in a safe spot. You can Google the company because they still are in the business. The company's name is the Chant Group, and you can kind of see it on the side of my white hat there, Jules. But so they are still in business, and the owner of the company is a fellow by the name of Ted Chant. And Ted was a very influential person in my career. And Ted grew up in Montreal, and he got his I'll call it, spent the first 20 years of his career working for Kiewit, which is a pretty large contractor in the US. And they actually built a lot of the hydroelectric facilities up in northern Quebec. So that's where Ted learned the business. And what he learned was that he wasn't really treated very well when he left that company. So in his early 40s, he had done quite well for himself. So he decided he was going to start his own business where he treated people right. And he absolutely did that. So that was what the company culture was like, that what I was in there. So the company actually started open its doors in 1999, 2000. And this was, again, 2003. So one of the very first projects. And what the company has now morphed into, looking ahead to 23 or 24 years since it's been in its place, is they act more as a consultant services company, and they're not really in the contracting business anymore. So they do things like check estimates for company, take a look at risk portfolios. They do a lot of work supporting owners who might not have the right expertise to manage a capital project. And I worked on a lot of those types of assignments in my later years with the company, and was able to learn a lot of different things. So they're still in business. They have around 15 to 20 employees, and they operate like a small consultant shop. But in the peak of when they were doing contract work, we probably had 120 to 150 employees at one time in the early 2000s.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's interesting how businesses change as experiences impact them.
Yeah, you learn what you're good at, and you learn what you're bad at.
Yeah, no shit. I think you just made a comment that it's lucky that it didn't affect your own professional reputation, but that's an interesting one because sometimes the way I turn the term of phrase I use, brown stuff sticks sometimes. Right. Yeah. So you were involved in a project that didn't go very well, and you were fortunate enough to go and work on a project that was successful. But did any of that legacy sort of stay with you, or did that? And you mentioned it, I think, like, oh, I was on that project, and what the fuck's going on, type thing, right? So,
100%.
Did that impact you at all, or influence you at all?
It didn't, and it was. Maybe it was the remote nature of the project, and we ended up not setting foot in the Yukon again, although I would love to go on vacation again. It's a fantastic part of the world and some of the greatest people you'll ever meet. But no, it didn't. I came in closer to the end. A lot of the key people that worked on that project, you're bang on. They didn't stick around very long. We got through the claims process, and they were, and they weren't let go, but they just knew that it was time to go do something different because there was some things there. I ended up sticking around, worked on a whole lot of different projects, and it was all gravy for me. So it didn't affect me, thankfully.
Right, Scott, thanks. Amir has a question. Had they done any feasibility study prior to the project initiation? So basically, what was the pre-planning before they committed to the project, I think?
Yeah, so they did a couple of they did a couple of things. So they did and probably I didn't mention in the presentation because again, didn't want to get into too many of the technical details, but they did a pre-feasibility study where they went up and did ground samples and all of these sorts of things. But what they did was, after they did that geotechnical investigation settings, the route changed. So the route slightly changed. And as a result of that route changing, and it wasn't like hundreds of kilometers by any means, it was hundreds of meters, the soil conditions were just that much different that far away, and that was just the lay of the land there. So yeah, we did a lot of there was pre-feasibility work done. Could there have been more? Probably. Could there have been some better planning there? Probably. But they were just significantly different, and the realignment of the route in a few places really changed that and impacted the project.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Getting to the end here, so I think it says Zoom user, so I don't know who that particular person is. So, as you mentioned, a proper contractor selection means having the right person would help to avoid most of the problems. Any comments on the selection procedure and work assignments?
Yeah, I think that looking back at it, I probably wouldn't have realized this 20 years ago, but you realize it now, is that on the contractor side, the project manager, real good person, would give you the shirt off his back, but felt like he was a bit of a salesman, and that he knew more than he actually did. And I think that it would have been and had never worked on a transmission line project before. So I think it would have been a very wise decision, is that if this was a business that we wanted to get into, that you would go out and find some transmission line experts to be assigned to these projects. So I think that was a really key lesson learned, to make sure you get those right assignments. And it's not to say that you can't have a good mix of, greeting people who are learning, but they would just learn from those experienced people who have done this before. So I think there was an opportunity missed there to make sure that we had a few more seasoned veterans on that particular project, for sure.
Okay. There was one final question, and I'm not sure if Amir, you got the answer there, was regarding, did the contractor maintain the name that they were under at the time? And I think you answered that question, but just to clarify, Scott, did they stay the same company, or did they morph into a different entity?
No, they kept the same company. They used to be called Chant Construction, and now if you look it up, they're Chant Group, because they don't necessarily do construction, but
rebranding, as it says there. Yeah. So
yeah, rebranding, exactly right. Yeah, if you were to go to their legal name by law, it would say Chant Construction Limited, now known as the Chant Group. Yeah.
Yeah. I use it, same meat, different gravy, right? So
okay. Great. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
That's all the questions we had there, Scott. Great stories, right? I love these things, right? I know we're a technical-based association, but sometimes the real life stories are the most important. It's the scars and the knocks that we experience, that we then look back and go, how would I have done this differently? So I think you sharing of this experience. And I know, Scott, I think you shared this with me many years ago when we were sat in Bruce site in B29 in the trailers there, and we had this conversation about, what made you do estimating and get into this experience. So sharing it again today, obviously it's stuck with you. It's been an experience that has shaped you, right? And we all have those. And I want to take this forward and offering it up to anybody on this call tonight is you have the same experiences, please let me know, and we can have the same sort of knowledge share. It's not just about the technical stuff we do as project controls people. It's about why we've learned that it's important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I love sharing the story, because it sticks with me. It'll stick with me until the day that I retire. And I think there's something to be learned from it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share it with the group here tonight. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, no worries.
Nice to see some familiar faces on the chat too. So hi, everybody.
And Marfiza thinks you want to be a Netflix star, but I'm not sure if you got the face for television or not. Maybe the face.
I don't.
Maybe the face for radio.
Yeah, I'll have to paint something over top of it. Yeah,
absolutely, we can do that. Okay, guys, I really appreciate everybody's time. This will be available. I'll complete the recording tonight. I'll do some editing and I'll stick it on our YouTube channel, which we have. If you didn't believe that, all our presentations go on our YouTube channel. So please check that out. I'll send the link out to all the attendees tonight. I know, Scott, I appreciate it and thank you.
my pleasure.
We had 40 odd people register and there was 20 odd people show up. That's good. So you did good, because people will register and then expect to get the recording. So I'm sure they'll be insightful with your recording when I share it. So I'll provide any feedback I get to you direct. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, people, I'll let you get about your night. It's just gone 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Enjoy your beer. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.